Hi everyone, my name is Ananya. I'm going to be giving a workshop on equitying. The main purpose I have with this workshop is just to give you all a better understanding of what equity does, because I think most people just know what they hear in briefings and probably from their own interactions with equity, but also just help those who are interested understand the processes that you have to go through, how to like handle investigations and kind of dealing with complaints and what the before and during competitions kind of looks like for an equity officer. I do want to preface this by saying that obviously it's different for every single equity officer because you can't predict what's going to go wrong, what's going to go right, all these different things. So this is just my experience and based off of that. But I hope it's useful nonetheless. Nonetheless. Anyway, yes. Cool. Just a little bit about me first. I think some of this was mentioned in Martine's very lovely post that was sent out yesterday, but I have a wee bit of equity experience. I have been doing this, I think, for the last 2 years. The first comp I ever equitied was Edinburgh Schools, which was hosted by my previous, I guess, still current union. They'll be my union currently in my heart. But yes, I was equity for one of their schools comps with one of my very good friends, Adam Malice, who you might have seen equitying and CAing a few other competitions in and around Europe. But since then, I have been incredibly lucky and gotten a lot of fantastic experience, both at many competitions, including Uhuru Worlds, Vienna IV, which was just last weekend, Cambridge IV, Utrecht Open last year, Amsterdam Open, Princeton IV, Zagreb Open, the Nordic Schools Debating Championships, as well as a few other many other competitions. I'm also set to be on the equity team for EUDC this year in Copenhagen. I'll be equiting alongside Anna Shredder and Alex McCready, who are both also fantastic. Altogether, I've been doing competitive debating for about 4 years. And yeah, there's a few other things about my general debating experience. But the thing that probably most people know me for in equitying is I often have a little mascot. His name's Stevie. He's here today. And he'll also be helping you along the way. He's on every single slide in animated form. But yes. Um, anyway, I will continue to do the workshop like this, but maybe not. Anyway, so just a little bit about what is equity. This is somewhat covered in briefings, but I just wanted to go a bit more in depth about it. The main aim for equity is safeguarding, or a form of safeguarding, which we do via constructing policies and informing participants of certain things that they can do during the competition to help enforce these policies. Um, as well as this, we do have to sometimes take negative consequences or actions against violations of this policy. Again, these policies do tend to exist to help protect, if not all participants, a certain group of participants. So, for example, what we have in the Code of Conduct tends to be something that all participants can do to ensure that they are creating a very inclusive and safe environment at a competition. But there are certain policies, like for example, the pronoun policy, which help protect certain groups who might identify with a gender or an identity other than what they were assigned at birth, or even just for people who are exploring their gender identity, or even just for people to learn more about it, to understand what the implications of expressing your pronouns are, to normalize these type of actions, and to just kind of carry this behavior not just in competitions, but hopefully forward as well. But mainly, obviously, we see this enforced in competitions. We act as a point of contact, so this can be people might seek guidance or ask questions about equity, might want clarifications on certain things. This is usually actually quite helpful and useful if you have questions because it might be pointing out something that we can do to help clarify certain aspects. I know for me personally, when people have come and asked me questions about certain parts of the policy, I've usually worked on that particular policy and my documents and templates to try to make it a bit clearer so people there's some things that aren't necessarily in a gray zone. So I think this has specifically happened with my tech policy over the last few months and just kind of wording it in a way that clarifies it and makes it just a bit more understandable for people. But I think just even generally like just asking general questions about what does equity necessarily do, which is I think a very fair question to ask because we seem to be almost everywhere and doing a lot of things at once at a competition. Um, And the other thing as well is we are in charge of creating and managing documents and confidential information and sensitive information that you guys trust with us. So before competitions, this looks like organizing the policy and forums and briefings, which I'll get into in a little bit more depth in a second. During competitions, this can be inputting clashes and everything like that. The most important thing to remember is that all information remains confidential. So there are things um, that I vaguely remember from early competitions that I have equityed that I will never tell anyone because I'm not meant to. But I think it is just the most important thing that I think a lot of people question about whether it actually happens. But information does very much remain confidential. It is only the equity team who are privy to this. We're very, very strict usually about making sure people don't have access to these folders or informations, especially clash forums. But yeah, cool. Over my small time equitying, there have been a few things that people have discussed in relation to equity, and there are a few things that I think can be true, but I think need a little bit more nuance. So the first one is the idea that equity officers are nice. I think this can be true. Um, but it's not something that's necessary to the role. And what I mean by this is obviously you interact with a lot of people, you have to manage a lot of interpersonal issues from time to time, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be nice in your approach with equity. The most important thing is that you need to be fair. So it's something that if you might need to rationalize a little bit, but the aim of the decisions we make in equity aren't to make people happy or to please people, but it's necessarily to do what we can do to safeguard people and participants and make sure the competition is a welcoming space for people. So this can be that sometimes you people don't get the outcome that they wish for, but it's based off of what the equity team has decided to be the most fair in that circumstance. The other is that equity seem to have a lot of power. I think that this is fair because we have a whole list of consequences that we can enact on people. However, I think that these actions don't necessarily always come about. Like, for example, I think it's very unlikely you'll see people having their break eligibility removed. I think there are a lot of barriers in place to stop this being used so liberally, and to stop it becoming like a slippery slope where suddenly everything kind of mandates people having their break eligibility removed. Um, and the other thing as well is that there is a lot of procedure and I don't want to say rules, but a lot of um, aspects to how equity come to their decisions, how they make sure that they make informed decisions, that it's very rare that you see the removal of participants, expulsion, or like break and eligibility being enacted or anything, or even people not being allowed to attend competitions. They only happen in the most kind of strict situations or the most necessary situations. The final thing is, what is the point of equity? I think I've said this a few times already, but essentially to keep safe the competition spaces safe and inclusive. And I think there's also a lot to learn from equity. For example, there's a lot of important subjects that we cover in our briefings and in our policy. This can be, like I've said, the stuff in code of conduct, how to navigate conversations, how to kind of discuss stereotypes, generalizations, how to do this in the best way possible without being triggering or harmful to groups who might be affected by this type of language. What is consent? How do you have informed consent? How do you make sure that you interact with people in a way that makes them feel positive, rather than like feeling kind of encroached upon or just kind of leaving a space feeling happier or better than they entered it, I guess. So you can learn a lot from equity. All right. So I'm going to discuss mainly before the competition, but I'll also discuss things during the competition because obviously there is a lot that happens during the competition, but it's very difficult to predict those things, as I said before. But before the competition, there is a fair bit that you actually do. I mentioned before about policies, so you will always need to create a policy or forms. For the forms, this can be clashes, complaints at least. Sometimes you will also need to do an accessibility or support form as well. This can just be for people who require certain measures to accommodate to access needs and everything throughout the competition. This can look like needing to use a lift, needing to use a table to prep, all of these different things. But most of the times you will at least need at least a clash and a complaints form. The policy, usually how this works is you have a working template or an existing policy that you work on. The way I usually do it is I have a template, but I actually haven't used it in months. I tend to take the last policy that I've used at a competition or on a competition I've worked with, and I look at it and I think, is there anything from that competition that I've necessarily learned that I think needs to be clarified, added onto? I usually go through the policy, the entirety of the policy, just to make sure everything is clearly expressed because I do have a problem with written expression and not being concise. And just making sure that it's all clear, but also anything that I feel needs to be added in is added into the right spots and in the most appropriate way. Um, but I think that the best thing to do is to take an existing policy if you are a new equity officer, take a few of them, look at the kind of common factors that come up. So the common policies, there are a few that are necessary, like the pronoun policy, the tech policy, the opt-out policy, leaking, and a few others that you'll see pop up. All the stuff on socials and consent and everything that you'll see in kind of commonly across codes of conduct, having a violation procedure, showing people how you investigate and everything. These are all very important aspects to a policy. It's more, I think, where the individual voice comes out is how you express it and how you format it, how you kind of discuss it. And I think this is where there's room for people to explore those policies, see what they think needs to be emphasized. And there's also the space to add in any tournament specific policies. So, for example, at Vienna last week, we did have a tournament specific section as well that we included. And yeah. Well, I've just included a example of a code of conduct section. This is actually from the VNIV policy document, but essentially it's just a few things that are usually there. So at the beginning, you have a kind of overview of just some things to note. I think the things that I mentioned there, I can't read it as well actually, but some about the use of substances and how they're not a mitigating factor for being inequitable. Know your limits or don't partake in taking these substances. Consider how your actions affect others. When asked to help or accommodate to an access issue, please do so and do so respectfully. And the other important thing to note is that equity cannot change calls. This is something where if you have issues with judges, this is not something for us to deal with, but it's for the CAs to deal with. And please do this via the feedback form. Following that, then, is you have some stuff on tournament specific behavior, which was specific to hosting a competition in Vienna. And then following that is what I usually have in a policy, which is the direct and indirect discrimination stuff. This is where you'll have a lot of information on how to handle generalizations, stereotyping, but also implicit biases, which is a form of indirect discrimination. You'll also have a section on bullying and harassment, victimization and retaliation, undermining the equity policy, and then also some stuff on socials. But essentially, the point of the code of conduct is just to discuss behavior patterns, how to make sure that you're able, like giving some recommendations on how to check yourself and hold yourself accountable and be aware of how there are implicit patterns that we all have that can be harmful to other people, and they're not necessarily bad. But it's just something that ways to accommodate to make sure that people feel included in the space as well. So yes, how to so I've already mentioned a bit about how to write a policy. Um, I think the way I also format it just generally with the policy is that you'll have the introduction section where at the beginning you'll have contact information for you and your fellow equity officers. And this is important to have just so people know how to contact you. You also usually have a kind of I don't know what the like a kind of key or like a way to refer back to like forms and everything. So you have a list of the forms. There's a fun feature in Google Docs where you can add a link to a bit of text. So I like just having the text embedded in like the text that's the link embedded in the text that says like Clash form or something. But people just usually include the link in it. But that's also a good place to make sure that you have a kind of unified document where all of the equity information is, so people can refer back to it. So the policy document is very important, and I highly recommend people read them more. But yes, forms. So similarly to the to the policy itself, you can use a template and just kind of add and refine for all new competitions. The main thing with forms is to be mindful of the settings for responses and everything. So there are some things that will obviously be required answers. This can be, for example, with the clash form, your name, how to contact you, are you speaker or judge? Are you clashing a speaker, judge, or institution? What is the name of this participant or institution, etc. Something that, for example, in the clash form you won't need to keep as required is the like team name if you are clashing a speaker. Um, This also is important with the anonymous complaints form because there's an option to anonymously submit complaints. So usually the name section or the how to communicate to section are left unrequired. As well as that, before the competition, you might have some initial issues to tackle. So there might be a team name that org are a bit about, and they'll ask you to just check the participants list after like reg to make sure that everything is fine. This is usually a process of you look through the participants list, you see if there's a team name or kind of sometimes people will have nicknames. If you think it's deemed inappropriate, or it might seem harmful to a specific group, usually you reach out to the team or the person and you say, Hi, I'm reaching out on behalf of the equity team for X competition. It's come to our attention that this is the team name you are choosing. We believe that it is like it might be inappropriate in this context for XYZ reasons. Would you be open to changing it to something that's a bit more accommodating to the policy? That is like a rough idea of how we reach out and deal with those type of issues. Oh yeah, I already covered this stuff. Oopsies. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. Thanks, Alex. Oh yeah, the briefing. So this is essentially you write this after the policy has been finalized to make sure that all of the team are in agreement with how the policy looks and that everything is clear, everyone's happy. The briefing is essentially taking the policy, synthesizing it, and drawing out the most important parts, and comprising it into a presentation that usually lasts about 10 minutes. I think 15 minutes is pushing it usually. And I do apologize. I think my briefings are usually more on the 15-minute side, but usually a good timed briefing should be about 10 minutes. And since there is a lot to get through, it is something where you do have to prioritize some things. But the best way to, uh, I don't know, like the best thing to do because it's such a short time is to remind people, hey, we have a policy with so much more detail. How about you go check that out? Um, yeah, I think I actually really like doing briefings because I am a very big fan of design. Graphic design is my passion. As you can see with the hedgehogs and the fun colors on this presentation. But I think it's one of the few things you get to have proper fun with in equity. Um, and I think the most important thing to have in a briefing is to have a slide at the beginning with your photo, your name, and some contact information. Let people take a picture of this. It's the best way to make sure that they have your contact information there on hand if absolutely necessary. Somewhat similar to the policy, but it's something that's displayed up in pretty colors. So, and everyone should be listening at that point. So, yeah. All right. So I do have like a few kind of interactive exercises. So I'm just gonna give like a few minutes so people can just think about these. If you're watching the recorded version of this, then yeah, you can get extra time, I guess. But essentially, the thought exercise is as follows. You get three clash submissions. One states romantic relationship between a judge and a speaker. Another states majors partners between two speakers on different teams. And another states interpersonal issues between two judges. What would your responses to these three clashes be? That's true, actually. This is for the Yeah. Okay, cool. Um, Alex, could you change the slide, please? Thank you. Yeah. I told you graphic design is my passion. Um, So I basically color coded it based off of the responses that I would personally give. So for the first one on romantic relationship between a judge and speaker, this would be approved. Um, yep, nothing to really add there. It's a fair justification. Don't need any further information. It is between a judge and a speaker, absolutely fine. For the second one that states majors partners between two speakers on different teams, this would unfortunately be rejected for the reason that speaker on speaker clash is not allowed at competitions. So yeah, that is the only reason that it would be rejected. If it were between a speaker and a judge or two judges, then it would be approved. However, in this instance, it would not be. And for the last one about interpersonal issues between two judges, it is in white, which means that this would need to be followed up on. Usually, and actually, I won't spoil the rest of the next few slides. But yeah, okay. A little bit more on clashes. So most of them are actually quite straightforward. You have romantic relationships, major partners, institutional clash, and there are a few others that are escaping me right now. But yes, most of them are quite straightforward. Oh, training as well, coaching is another thing as well. They're quite straightforward. Usually we see them, we go, yep, this is absolutely fine. Um, Others aren't necessarily. There might be some things that you need to discuss. You might need to, usually, if you need to discuss, this will usually warrant a follow up to the person who has submitted the clash. The main type of clash that is a bit difficult to, I guess, approve initially is when people have the justification of simply severe interpersonal issues with no further detail. So what exactly do severe interpersonal issues entail? This can be past equity issues at a previous competition or in another debate setting, whether it be at a union or another space. It can be like really bad personal schisms. It These schisms do have to be more than just you find a person annoying or dislike them. This it's very difficult to quantify what exactly this is. So unfortunately, this is something that is more of a case by case system. I think it's something that intuitively looking at a justification or looking at a reasoning and you can be like, yep, okay, this does warrant a clash. So the way you draw this line is usually with impartiality and how likely it is that there is a bias between these participants that can affect the ability for adjudication or adjudicating with this person to happen fairly. This is one reason why you have the kind of what's the word, the more straightforward clashes being like romantic relationships, major partners, coaching, training, all of these different things, because there is a certain dynamic at play there which does affect people's ability to be impartial. For example, I could not be judged by my boyfriend because he would be worried I would be mad at him if he gave me the fourth, which I would be. um, and he would probably not be able to give me proper feedback as well. And there are things like that, which essentially, because there is a existing relationship there, it's very difficult to have a kind of impartial relationship in a debate. If you may. It depends on the issues, unfortunately. But I think just in my mind, there's no difference. I think if a judge says that I have issues, I worry I won't be able to judge this person impartially. I think it's a similar fear to I don't think this judge will judge me impartially. I think there's a bit more confirmation with the judge submitting the clash than the speaker because the speaker is a bit more speculative of I don't know, this could affect things. But the judge is like, no, I worry about this. So potentially I would be more I would be yeah, I can see what you mean. I would probably intuitively buy the judge a little bit more, but I think that doesn't mean that I would completely discount the speaker submitting it. I think it would be something where it would depend on one, what actually happened in the actual instance that took place, but also I would probably follow up anyway and ask for more details and to kind of gauge why they have this fear. I think the fear in of itself also can lend to whether they're able to impartially submit judge feedback on the person. However, I think the thing with this is that obviously there are two people in the team. Even if one person is impartial, there is still the likelihood the other person can submit judge feedback impartially, but still it is a fear of will this judge feedback be tainted by a bias. Um, so yeah. I think both could be approved depending on the situation. Um, but there's probably more grounds to follow up with the speaker than with the judge. But yeah, it is, yeah. Yeah, it could be tactical clash, which you should not do. Tactical clash is not a good system to have. Bad tactical clash. We don't like tactical clash. Um But yeah, I think the other thing as well with these type of severe interpersonal clashes is it can be another form of safeguarding. So it can be that something specifically bad has happened, or there's been a really, really like there's been a sudden interaction between these two people, and a clash, keeping them out of the same debate room and everything, can help safeguard one or both participants depending on the situation that has taken place. But again, I am speaking in very abstract, kind of vague terms because this is very much a case by case system. And I think the type of situations that usually fall under severe interpersonal issues are numerous. And yeah, there are a lot of things that can fall under this. But yeah, um, I think the more important thing to talk about is following up and what this necessarily looks like. You might have had this happen to you when you submitted a clash. So the main reason we follow up on things is to get more details on these kind of more elusive clashes. Again, noting what I said at the beginning, all this information is confidential. It is strictly known by the equity team. This is not something that we share like kind of freely or liberally with other people. And I get that this is a fear that people have in terms of disclosing very sensitive and personal information. Um, but people like this is not something that we talk about quite freely because I'm pretty sure that if an equity officer, someone who's an experienced equity officer, was sharing confidential information, would they wouldn't equity again. I think that they shouldn't like people just shouldn't do that. Like we're being trusted with very important information, we shouldn't share that. But what this can look like is essentially messaging the person, asking, "Can I have more details on this? Can you elaborate on what you mean by this term or this like severe interpersonal clash?" I'll probably say, "What do you mean when you say X?" You can clarify specific details as well. So, for example, it can be, is it just pertaining to this person, or is it with a few other people at the competition? Is it something that is a like an ongoing issue, or is it something that's passed and has kind of the whole situation itself has ended. An example of what I usually send is just there as well. But yeah, it's just usually like, "Hiya, how are you doing? I'm writing on behalf of X Equity Team to follow up on a clash you submitted. The reason you gave was severe interpersonal issues. Could you please elaborate on the situation a little more?" I also usually include a sentence as well to say something like, feel free to include as many details as you feel comfortable with, but don't feel the need to include anything that you are uncomfortable sharing. Because again, it is personal information. It is a little strange. I don't think that there is something like clash in anything apart from debating. So it can feel a bit unnatural to divulge this information and trust someone who is basically a stranger in a lot of instances. So yeah, it's do whatever you feel comfortable sharing, and if there is a need for more details, then you'll be asked again. But usually, there just needs to be a little bit of clarity on what the actual situation was. So yeah, okay. Another exercise, yay. You get a complaint that says a lot of people haven't been respecting POI preferences. They ask you to make a general announcement about this. You have received a few other complaints about this, and your other equity officers have noted this too in in rounds that they have judged. What would your response be? What would your response be to this complaint? Cool. But very grateful. Hi. Yeah. So the response I would give is similar to if you heard what Alex said. But essentially it would be, yes, you would give the general announcement. You would remind people that POI preferences are usually for access to help accommodate to access needs. So this can be something like sensory issues, auditory processing issues, etc. Um, and this can be asking for either verbal POIs because some people need this to properly register that a POI has been asked, or people asking for nonverbal POIs. There is the important note to make, which is that POI preferences do not mean asking for a specific team at a specific time. So, no, asking for a CG at minute 5 is not a POI preference. Yes, it is a preference that you have with taking your POIs, but it's not something that necessarily falls under the policy that most equity teams have in terms of POI policy, which specifically mandates people follow the either verbal, nonverbal, or any POI preferences that are attached to access needs. So yes, you would make the general announcement and you would remind people of this. Okay, so on to complaints. Once you receive a complaint, you should have an initial conversation with the person who is reporting the issue to get as much information as needed, and then you will conduct a further investigation if needed. The investigation size varies. Some issues won't need a very lengthy investigation, and most of the times you will have the information you need, and then you will discuss with the rest of the equity officers. So the previous example with POI preferences would be something where there's not necessarily like you've understand what the issue is. You've got enough complaints about it to say that this is a widespread issue, and you have quite a few people informing you of this. So there isn't a need to go out further and ask more people, hey, did this actually happen? What was your side of the story? Um, but rather you just discuss, okay, we're all in agreement that it's a general announcement. Oh, okay. Why are you not in agreement? Okay, now we're all in agreement after this discussion. What do we write in this announcement? Um, the other thing to note as well with this is that if someone reports an issue, a violation, a complaint, and asks for a particular outcome, like this is fine to go ahead with is if everyone on the team agrees that this is feasible or warranted. I think that this is also important that, for example, if you have someone ask you to only make a general announcement, then it's important to respect that. And like you can obviously check in with the person and say, hey, we've all spoken. We think that we should escalate this and talk to like the person who did this. It's important to see what they say as well. So you shouldn't go ahead and do something without, I guess, a consent or the knowledge of the person who submitted the complaint, even if it might be something that helps. It's still something to keep in mind. But also at the same time, if someone asks for, I don't know, removing someone's break eligibility because of uh, I can't even think of an example of something that like I don't know if someone says remove the break eligibility of a judge because they didn't give them the first, obviously that's not feasible, that's not warranted, you can't really do anything about that. So then obviously you wouldn't necessarily consider that as an action to take and you go with whatever you think was more feasible and what is more reasonable to do. Other times you will need to conduct an investigation. These can happen with complaints both before and during the competition. Um, yeah. So I've got again the PNIV equity violation procedure. So it's just usually there'll be a section that says resolving equity issues up there on the left, and then a little bit on the potential actions we can take. So the most common ones will be general announcements, mediation, enforcing apologies, removal of break eligibility, expulsion from the competition, or calling the authorities. This last one is very unlikely. I've never had to do that, thank God. And then a few things just to note as well on this procedure. So sometimes you'll preemptively reach out to discuss an ongoing or past equity issue that the equity team might need to be aware of. This can range from interpersonal to union-wide investigations. Like there's a whole bunch of things that can necessarily happen that people are like, hey, you should know that this is a kind of a big issue. Usually, if there is a fear of something happening because of this wider issue that's been brought to the attention of the team, or like if people feel like equity should just know, usually whatever it is, there'll be a discussion essentially had about this, and there'll be a discussion of, okay, how important is this to the competition, how like what can essentially happen, if anything can happen, how do we preemptively resolve this? So this can be, for example, like sometimes it's just something where people are letting the team know just to justify clashes, saying, "Hey, there's this huge thing happening right now, in my circuit, and because of that, there's going to be a whole bunch of clashes. So heads up." Or it could be something where, "Hey, there's been an issue with this particular thing is happening. You might want to consider it, talking to org about room allocations or crash allocations because of it." In which case, these are some ways in which you can take preemptive measures to ensure this. But it can also be if it's about particular people, if there's an interpersonal thing, then this can be something where you keep an eye on the people. You can have certain kind of uh, measures in place for safeguarding, but again, these tend to only happen when absolutely necessary. I think it's more likely that you have the kind of more neutral things of crash allocations or allocations in general being considered, and like being more happy to approve clashes on the basis of this issue. Yes, sometimes you will need to investigate these concerns a bit further to get a better picture of these things. Um, a lot of the times, these issues have been reported to other equity teams, so it might be that even those previous offices might reach out and let you know that this is an issue, or the people might say, "Hey, this equity team was the team that this was initially reported to." Like you can talk to them if you have more details. The thing with a full investigation, both before and during competition, is that you should keep the person who is affected by this, or most likely the person who has brought this issue to your awareness, keep them in loop of what you're going to do and get their consent. Because in some instances, it can be that they might not be comfortable with you reaching out to certain people for any number of reasons. And it's more of a thing of saying, "Hey, look, we need to do this for the investigation to go ahead." In which case, they might say, "Ah, okay. Um, yeah, this like thanks for letting me know and giving me the heads up and everything like that." But it's also because it can be quite sensitive, the stuff you're dealing with. And there are a lot of implications that can come with you talking to other people, because obviously as equity, we're not like trained in any kind of like professional manner. We kind of just, at least for me personally, I learned from all the people that I initially equitied with, and just from the experience I then got at further competitions. But there's no formal training for equity officers, and we're not like a legal entity, so we have to make sure that we don't like step on the toes of like people when they're trying to go through legal proceedings or something like that too. Um, but yeah, there is a lot of pre-competition procedure to follow through. So I think that sometimes it is actually good to know some local legal knowledge. And this is just more of my advice to people. So it might be handy to research this or have someone who is on the equity team who knows a little bit about this or is probably familiar with the legal system and some intricacies. This is also important for things like if you need a minors policy, like having information like what is the age of consent, what is the drinking age, all these different things that yes, you can Google, but it's still like you still have to Google it and have that type of knowledge there. Um, but yeah, and I think the type of more severe the kind of consequences you can have for these interpersonal issues before a competition, um, these aren't used liberally. They're only used in instances where you absolutely need to use them. And this is just going back to what I said before about equity actually doesn't have like we have power, but we don't use it a lot, because we have to use it in a very measured way. So mainly because otherwise it creates a slippery slope where suddenly everything becomes like you can justify expulsion for almost any action that people take. So you do have to be very careful with how you use these type of measures and consequences in any form of investigation. Yeah. Uh, oh yes. That's fine. That's okay. Okay. Complaints during competition. This is again, I think people will be familiar with this because of briefings. I'm just going to add on to it in a little tiny way. But essentially, these investigations can happen to differing scales in competition, as I mentioned before. Like, for example, the investigation of generalizations happening across rooms is very different to the investigation of repeated violations of a pronoun policy. And they're quite different complaints in nature as well. They can range from having an initial conversation to the person who's reported the instance, getting details from them, and then also escalate to getting more details from other people if absolutely necessary, and then having a discussion. based off of the course of action. Usually when we reach out to other people, this is mainly chair judges. If it happened during a round, we can also reach out to speakers. But it's usually someone who is like present and aware, so it's usually that's why chairs tend to be the first point of contact. Um, Most of the times, it's very similar to what I described above, but the main difference is that you will go to the person that the complaint is about. So if there is a complaint made about a person, we will have a discussion with them, get their side of the story of what happened. Usually in these discussions, it's a kind of they don't realize that a certain action has warranted a complaint, and then they're usually quite receptive to this. They're usually like, like thank you for letting me know. I'll make sure I don't do it in the future, which is always a very lovely conversation to have because people are just very understanding of the situation. Um, and following that discussion, then the team will focus on what is the final action we're going to take. Is this going to be something where they've apologized? We're going to pass on the apology. Is this enough? Let's refer back to what the other person said they wanted from this discussion or from raising the complaint with us, and what can we do essentially going ahead to make sure this doesn't happen again. So yeah. All right. Final exercise, I think. But you get a complaint that states someone was not respecting another person's pronoun preferences. They ask you to speak to that person. The other equity officer doesn't see the need in doing this, suggesting a general reminder instead. What would your response be to this complaint?
It might out of language at first. And there's a general reminder. In that case, will not work for the person.
Yeah. So, um, yes. So again, I do agree with Alex's response, which I don't know if anyone heard. Um, Firstly, you would check if they are comfortable talking to the person in question and raising this themselves. If they are, then you would encourage them to do that, but also thank them for the fact that they raised the issue to you, because it can be something where if you get another complaint about this person, you can potentially be like, is this a pattern? Okay. And it's just good to keep in mind so that you don't have these isolated issues popping up, but you can see more if this is something that they take on the feedback constructively, essentially. Um, then if they're like, no, I don't feel comfortable talking to this person, um, I think then what you would do is you would go back to this person and say, like, I think there's still grounds to speak to the person who has made the complaint. I think obviously you would have a discussion with the other equity officer, though, and try to say, look, like a general reminder is good, but this is something where one person has done this. This complaint is about one person, so it's probably best that we just talk to them, have like a kind of casual conversation where we're just like, hey, we've had this complaint about you. Like, can you like, this is not to say that you are a bad person in any way, shape, or form, but more that this has happened. Could you just be mindful of this in the future? And then that's it. If they're very adamant though about a general reminder, then you would probably go back to the person and say, like, we're feeling more of a general reminder. Would this be something that you're okay with? And then you would kind of, it's one of those things where you have to, it depends on how people respond to the conversations you're having. But I think in an ideal situation, you would still have the conversation you would have the conversation with the person the complaint is about. And you would try to hopefully get the other equity officer to see this way. But yeah. Yeah. Okay. Almost done. The final thing I just want to touch on is just working with other people, because you do work with a lot of people in equity. Um, so when you're interacting with participants, you have a lot of people who have very either strong or not strong beliefs about equity. They might be receptive to it, they might not be. They might be a bit more sensitive to some things, and they might be a bit more nonchalant. But basically, like individuals will be individuals, and you have to find a way to work with all of them. I think the most important thing is, as I said at the beginning, is you're not there to police people, but to do what is most fair considering the harm or action that has been done to like in that specific instance. It is also important to hear out as many people as possible to make sure you're making the most informed decision. And not just hearing them out, but also kind of it might be that you hear like wildly different stories from all of these different people, and then it's just sitting down with the other equity officer, which is why it's so important to have more than one equity officer at a competition, because it's a lot for one person to try and come up with these informed decisions by themselves and not have someone to like kind of bounce off of, but also to hold them accountable and make sure that they're making the most informed and balanced decision possible. Um, but yeah, it's making sure you sit down and have a proper discussion and saying, okay, what is the best thing to do based off of the information we have in front of us? And I think the key is to make sure you do things to the best of your abilities. There will be things that are out of your control. You might have delays, you might have so many small things on your plate that you have to deal with, but you can't find one person, the other person's not responding to your texts, delays outside of your control that are happening. There are so many things you need to balance as an equity officer. So at the end of a competition, just know you probably did the best that you can, considering whatever the situations and circumstances were. So yeah, and then as well as working with participants, you also have to work with ORCOM. And yeah, you also have to work with org. So you have to work with CAs, tab, org, along with the rest of your team. I think that with people outside of the equity team, you only need to interact with them when necessary. So this is usually when things, when there is a complaint or something arising. And I think in my experiences working with different CA teams, different tab teams, different org teams, and everything in these kind of situations. Everyone will have like very, very valid opinions. And honestly, it's kind of nice because sometimes people say, this might be the best course of action. And in your head, you're like, actually, yes, that is the best course of action. Thank you for helping me out. And I think that there is a like a really lovely aspect in that collaborative part that comes out with equity. But I think also with your fellow equity officers, you'll be working together. Hopefully you won't have anything go wrong. But things might go wrong. And it's important to have a very good working relationship with them from the minute you're both confirmed and you start working on things. It's important that you guys make decisions together, that you share information where possible. There is some instances where people might say, I'm clashed from this person, or I don't feel comfortable sharing this information with this person. In which case, that might put you in a bad spot where you have to decide on things by yourself. Because again, similarly, Clash works in a similar way with equity and non-equity people. Um, but it is something where you still, outside of these instances, it's still important to make sure that you are working together. You can also delegate is the thing. You don't have to do everything together. So, for example, one person can write the policy, one person can work on the forms, another person can do the briefing, someone can input the clashes, like all these different things. You can delegate along the way, do these tasks separately. But I think when it comes to making the decisions and how you're going to approach certain issues and all, you need to make those decisions together. You need to make sure everyone has the same amount of information and they're not withholding information, to make sure that everyone is in the same boat and can make the most informed decision and the best decision as a team. Yeah, and like I would also encourage having and I can't read words for a second. Initial meetings, just to make sure that you can work together to formulate the policy, work on forms, make sure everything is kind of sound in that regard. Especially if you're working with someone who is a bit new to equity, it can be good if you have a little bit of experience just to be like, hi, this is what we usually do in a policy. Have a read through. Do you have any issues? These are the forms, these are the briefings, these are what they will do and everything. But yeah, I think that because a lot of people learn how to do equity through experience and working in like competitive equity spaces, sometimes it is one of those things where you're kind of pro-amming in an equity sense. So it is important to have that really good relationship with whoever you're working with. So yeah. Okay. This is the last thing for me on why you should be equity. Look, I really enjoy equity. It's probably my favorite thing in debating. Like I thought it was judging. I think equity is actually really I think it's a really great job. It's a really important part of running a competition because you do all the stuff with like people and making sure that they're safe and they're all good and um making sure nothing will go wrong, but also if something goes wrong, you tend to be the ones who are helping out, and I do really like helping people. Um, so, and I think that's the main selling point for me on equity is that you do help people. You help them both overcome certain problems at a competition, but also you help them by kind of educating them on important things like how to create a safe environment. You offer a lot of important information, like I said before, like in like informed consent, what it looks like, why pronouns are important, how to like ask people for their pronouns and kind of create a conversation there. Um, and I think also one thing I found is that after doing equity a lot is I do have that kind of equity mind in my brain, which is like, what can I do in the situation to make sure people feel included? What can I do to make sure that my actions and my language and all are inclusive and kind of not like going to be triggering to anyone as well. But just like you have this kind of like I at least have this kind of subconscious dialogue or monologue in my head. There are also a lot of transferable skills. So it can look good on a CV. I'm yet to see the results of this, I won't lie, but I you do learn a lot in terms of working in a team, giving presentations, mediation, working under pressure. I think especially mediation and working in this like kind of very interpersonal problem context is something that is unique to equity. And you don't do as much in, from what I understand, in like tabbing, CAing, maybe a bit in org, and other org work. And finally, you meet a lot of cool people and you get to work with them. I have made a lot of friends with equity officers that I've worked with. The equity officer for Utrecht Open this weekend is one of my close friends. And I met them while doing equity with them. And I'm so grateful for that opportunity. So at the very least, you get to meet a lot of people through it. And I think that's just really fun. And it's just a great opportunity, guys. It's so much fun. Except when you have stuff that obviously happens, but even then you'll be fine. And you just trust yourselves. You'll be fine. Yeah. Anyway, for me and Stevie, thank you. I hope this helps. And I hope you guys equity.